Welcome to One Word Stories. My name is Joanna, and I'm really happy to welcome a very precious guest of mine, Monika de Waal. Monika de Waal, originally from the Netherlands, who has also spent a couple of formational years in Pakistan, is a fantastic interculturalist who is into organizational development and personal leadership. She works a lot in multicultural teams, and just before we clicked the button recording, we said, hey, working with the virtual global teams was also part of the game also before pandemics. And this is also what Monika focused on. However, because of her experience as a third culture kid, when she decided to do the PhD at the University of Rotterdam, she decided to focus on the very, very interesting theme, namely third culture kids and their idea to create, to design their identity. And as I got to know Monika at the theater conference I think it was in Spain, in Valencia, already back then, I saw her working with storytelling exactly in this context, in the context of third culture kids. And this is exactly the reason why I couldn't resist to invite you, Monika, right now. First of all, congratulations on defending your PhD on the third culture kids.
Yeah, thank you very much.
A reason to celebrate. Monika, what brought you actually to working with storytelling practices?
It's the storytelling in my work is so important. When I work with teams, when I work with leadership teams, when I work with one-on-one coaching, where you're from and what you bring has been developed through your life. And your life story, that's something you can always change, you can build upon. And that's the part that I find really interesting. And you need it to be able to develop for the future. And when you only look at the now and say, what are you now? There's a reason why people have become the way they are. People are not born angry. They are, for example, so then when I deal with teams in conflict, then people say, oh, this person is always angry. And there's always, you're never born that way. There's something happened to you. So there's a story there. And that's what I would like to bring up. But also the nice story, the inspiration that you can give to others by sharing your story. That's something that I really like. So.
So as I hear, you work with stories at different levels, at this level of personal stories, but also at the level of these huge narratives, let's say like world stories, cultural stories that were also part of the formation for the people.
Yeah, yes, yeah. So if you look at the stories for third culture kids, for example, there's many different stories, which makes all of them unique. And at the same time, they share a pattern. They share this having lived abroad as a result of the choice of the parents to work abroad in a different culture than the home culture of the parents. So that's what all the TCKs share. And the funny thing is, when you go, for example, go to a conference of the families in global transition, you will immediately find TCKs relating to that point and to that story in their life. So there's also bigger lines and patterns to the story, I think.
Yeah. So how do they actually form their identity? What is your experience? You have interviewed so many TCKs for your PhD, and already before actually had contact with many people with this experience.
Yes, yeah. Well, how do they form their identity? I think your identity is formed through your intercultural experiences, and you develop competencies as a result of that. So, what I found that when comparing TCKs with non-TCKs, their intercultural sensitivity scores higher, and there is mediated through open-mindedness. Third culture kids prefer transformational leadership more. So there is this part of competencies that they develop. And on the other side, there is this cultural identity shifts that happen. And Nan Sussman has described that process of intercultural identity shifts, what happens when you transition from one place to another. It's based on, I should say, the affect that people develop, that TCKs develop, for either the home culture or the host culture. Mm-hmm. So your whole sense of belonging that is part of your cultural identity, where your roots are, where you feel at home, mm-hmm. I should say. Excuse me. That is related to this affect. When you think, I have lived in, for example, if I take my example, where I belong, part of me belongs in Pakistan. Mm. I am not Pakistani. I have a Dutch passport, and I have lived most of my life in the Netherlands. So something else develops as a cultural identity, which is usually called third culture, because it's not the home culture, the passport culture of the parents. It's not the host culture where you have lived, or the host cultures. But the third culture is a cultural identity that you have developed, and it's relating to the world and more cultures than the passport culture.
Yes, definitely, yes. Yeah. Definitely, yes. This is really, really fascinating, because I remember also talking to different third culture kids, and what is really striking about the dynamics of the conversation is that they are ready to give you the entire CV in key words. Yeah. So the first years of living, let's say in Nicaragua, then in Morocco, then later on high school in Geneva, and I decided to study somewhere in Canada. So very often, so you follow the entire journey, and you say like, wow.
Yeah, and what happens with TCKs, when you ask them where I'm from, where are you from? Then TCKs would say, do you want the long story or the short story? Yeah, the short story is, I lived abroad, and the long story is exactly as you say. It's this path of, I lived here, I lived there, and then this is what I experienced. And now there's also, we talked about you a little bit. I asked you, what about you? And you moved as an adult. So that's you share experiences that are very similar to TCKs, mm-hmm. but they call it a TCA, a third culture adult. Mm-hmm. And there's also the development of cultural identity is influenced by the same process. So that your affect for France or mm-hmm. Develops, and you think, that's a very positive experience. Yeah, that's where cultural identity forms.
Yes, definitely, yes. Definitely, yes. What I like about it so much is that you actually feel home in different places.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a beautiful TED talk from Selassie, and she says, "Don't ask me where I'm from. Ask me where I'm a local, where you are so at home that you can be." And the thing there is that where Selassie says where I'm a local, that also still relates to a place, mm-hmm. a possible place. Whereas I found that the TCKs that I interviewed are not linked to a place mm-hmm. somewhere or a country, but they're linked to people. Yeah. So I'm at home with my people, with whom I connect.
Yeah. What I really loved about your research and your approach was that you actually decided to give them a poem. And with this poem, with this, piece of art, actually, you triggered very, very interesting storytelling processes.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Yeah. It's a poem that was originally formatted by, it's a free verse format by George Ella Lyon, a woman in the United States, a writer. And she used it in a group to ask for other experiences than, oh, I'm born in Oosterbeek, I lived in Pakistan, da, da, da. So that's to get more related to the senses as well. So the poem asks about where are you from, but then describe it with the flowers from your growing up, or the food from your growing up, or what did the playground look like, or your school? Can you describe characteristics of that, and what were the experiences then? And every time when I use it, I tweak it for clients as well, to add possible work experience as well in it. But very, very often, people at the group, when they start sharing their poems, it gets very emotional. And people start crying, or they start sharing things that they have not shared before. Even sometimes they known each other for a long time. But it triggers something else, and I think I love it. It's really very beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I can imagine that it's very powerful, because actually it's very, very personal. Every single verse starts
Yeah.
with I'm
Yeah.
from,
I'm from.
and then people add, for example, family traditions, for example, home description,
Yeah.
yeah, and the sensory details, and the
Yeah.
specific places. Or also, as you have said at the very beginning, plants, flowers, something very natural.
Yeah.
So it's extremely personal.
Yeah. You really share a personal story, and of course, people can choose always what they would like to share, because some people say, "Oh, I don't want to share everything." I'll just share that I like to walk in nature, or that I grew up in a certain city. But very often people start on a different level. You speak to people, and that's what stories do, and what poems do.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes, definitely, yes. Yes, because you, first of all, use also different descriptions. You really want to share also the sensory parts.
yeah,
So you
yeah,
invite, so to say, people to your world
yeah,
of
yeah,
vision and
yeah,
hearing and
yeah.
sensing and taste and whatever.
And
And
there's something else. Sorry to interrupt, but what I need to add here is also the linguistic part as well.
mhm,
Because when you hear people say, I shared my story last week also with the team. We did the exercise, and I said, I'm from Chapati, and I'm from Chiracamise. And then people said, what did you say? I didn't
yeah,
get that word.
yeah, yeah,
But there's other languages that because these are the words and these are the terms for those recipes or those flowers or those rituals in that culture. And that's what you hear as well, what adds is
yes.
language. Yeah,
Yes, definitely, yes. And this is what is also so fantastic, because actually it brings me to one more question. How can you, or how can we also, all of us, work with stories to enhance this understanding of multicultural identities?
by I think by recognizing that each person has her own story or their own stories, and by postponing judgment about
Mhm.
it. That's a difficult process, to learn to hear the story and without immediate judgment, or saying that's weird, it sounds strange, or but asking questions, and like the format of the poem invites you to just listen and try to understand. And I think that's part of the strength as well.
Yeah.
It's not,
Yes.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah,
And as I see it, it's not only about this one aspect we have just emphasized, this sensory approach that
yeah,
people are inviting you to enter their
yeah,
world of experiences, but also to enter their emotional world. And I
Yes.
guess this is
Yeah.
also something that is
Yeah.
universal, because whatever emotions you address, they are
Yes. Yeah.
universal. Yeah. So
Yeah.
people can relate to these
Yeah.
emotions, and you just
Yeah.
explain, okay, this is actually something that triggered my sadness or my happiness,
Yeah. And
joy,
yeah.
in
Yeah. Yeah.
whatever
Yeah. Yeah.
place, in whatever
Yeah.
situation.
You're absolutely right there. And of course the way that people express their emotions in all these different cultures, that is very different. So sometimes in a multicultural group, you would find that the sadness is touched, but you see that people will not show it. They will, it has, and in other cultures it's much more opening up, and people won't feel embarrassed to cry. So that's also inviting to understand the differences there
Mm-hmm.
and to recognize them for what they are.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, very powerful. Yeah, the power of stories is really very, very important in this intercultural context, because um, I can imagine when we just remain at this cognitive understanding, uh, it's kind of dynamics. Okay, right now I understand, next, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not the point, because it's not transformational. We
Yeah.
need to understand it at this emotional
Yeah.
level, so
Yeah.
that we are also ready to bring more curiosity to the
Yeah.
room, to the
Yeah.
table, so to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
to also be more open to understand, for
Yeah.
example, this what you describe in your PhD, fusion
Cultural fusion.
identity. Yeah.
Yeah, cultural fusion was a term that already existed,
Mm-hmm.
and it was another word to describe acculturation. And
Mm-hmm.
acculturation is a process. So when being in other cultures, then there is this process of acculturation. And it's the influence back and forth from living in another culture and experience and influencing that culture as well. And the result of acculturation, of cultural fusion, is a cultural fusion identity.
Mm-hmm.
And it consists, so this is taking also a little bit back from what you said on looking at the affect and the behavior and the cognition. The ABC of identity is, of course, also part of cultural identity. So, and the affect and the behavior and the cognition can be recognized in how you have developed your cultural identity. And so we developed when writing my last article and my last study for the PhD, I looked at a continuum of when you are with integrating your cultural experiences. Some of them are really hard to integrate. Some cultures are very different from each other. So take an example of I know somebody who is both is multicultural, raised also multicultural, American French.
Mm-hmm.
And when she's American and she speaks American, she becomes USA American. And her speech is also American. On the other hand, she can be French because she is raised French as well. And then she becomes really very French
Yeah.
in her way of speaking. But so there is, and even I think the values, but it shows very clearly that there's two different parts there, and in this case, two different cultures. But that's switching, a
Mm-hmm.
cultural fusion identity. Then you have the joint, where you can recognize that there are differences, but at the same time they're inseparable. In my dissertation, I used the example of Jean Gu, the Macroy, who was the singer for the Eurovision Song
Mm-hmm.
Festival from the Netherlands. He is originally from Suriname,
Mm-hmm.
black, gay. He contributes a lot to what the Netherlands looks like, actually. And he has this joint. He is and Suriname and Dutch at the same time. You can see that it's not switching, but it's joint. And then the third cultural fusion identity is where we say it's blended. It's beyond. You cannot recognize the difference. There might be many different cultural experiences and cultures in the background that led to, and maybe the worldaholic. what a term that one of the TCKs used for herself, and I said, I love it. It's you cannot recognize. There's this globalness in her that and that's what I would say, that's the completely blended, where the fusion leads to something new with the blended, where the fusion is like oil and water. It can be in the same glass, but it's still very separate. So
Yeah.
split or switching, and where you can recognize that it's joined, it's together. Yeah.
Fascinating.
Thank you.
Fascinating. I
Yeah.
still remember, our common friend Tatiana, who also relocated as an adult actually to the United States from Russia.
Huh?
And yeah, and she shared once a story that she filled in a psychological test, personality test in Russian and in English, American
Yeah.
English.
Yeah. Yeah.
And she had two completely different results, as
Yes.
if two completely different persons had filled
Yeah.
the test. Because she said, in this US American one, she was much more assertive, much more,
Yeah. Yeah.
present,
Yeah.
so to
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
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 So it's really, really
Interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's exactly what happens with forming that cultural identity. And I don't think it's set forever that you are, we are now in this phase of our lives and we are like this. Our cultural fusion identity also changes. And it's not, there's not a perfect ideological thing that you should be blended or you should be switching, or there's no, we really think it's important to not to emphasize that it's open, that is,
Yeah.
you can have even a non-fused identity. That's because that's when you grow up monoculturally,
Yeah.
and at the same time, there's this whole discussion when you grow up monoculturally. It doesn't mean that there's no intercultural experiences, because
Hmm.
the cities in the Netherlands, for example, are hyper diverse.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there is so many diversity that you will meet. So that will lead to a cultural fusion identity. We're
Mm.
developing the scale for it now. One master student has tested the scale already. So we really would like to take it further. To, for example, ask your friend
Yeah. Yeah.
to do it again and say, well, what comes out? Because that would be
Mm.
fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, when I hear your description, I can relate to it also from this perspective of the narrative
Yeah.
identity. Yeah, that it
Yeah. Yeah.
simply
Clendinnen. Yeah.
changes within course of life. Yeah,
Of course it does. Yes.
yeah,
Of course
yeah.
it does. Yeah.
There is also one aspect that triggers my curiosity a lot. You said that you interviewed men and women
Yeah.
for TCKs.
Yeah.
Are there any differences that are gender specific?
Well, I didn't find it within my research, but there is research, for example, about female TCKs that they're not scoring very high on emotional stability.
Okay.
On
Mm-hmm.
the, and then of course, looking at I would challenge that as a female TCK, because when you look at the cultural bias of many of the testing and the tests, there is cultural bias in that as well. So you have to recognize that and say, why would you say that? Because you have looked at gender
Mm-hmm.
or as an influence. It might not have been in the gender, but in where people grew up, or what kind of TCKs they were. Their
Mm-hmm.
TCKs, the reasons why kids go with their parents are when they're corporate brats for the larger multinationals, or military brats, the kids that go with the military families, missionary kids. That's a completely different way of interacting with the host culture. Or so there's the variety is also there that could influence. So gender can influence. I didn't find it in my research that it would influence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And we have just touched upon a very, very important aspect in dealing with change, because within the last month, all of us, we went through a huge transition worldwide.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is the question I ask all my guests actually. What was the word that supported you in this tough times, and what is the story behind?
The word, yeah. One word, I think during the whole pandemic time for me is connecting, and it's really a verb. Connecting with, for example, the group of the Global Community Dialogue that that's almost my international family. I call them my international sisters and brothers. That's the group that we had a heartbeat going on every 2 weeks to meet online and to just also share what are the stories, what is happening in Canada, what is happening in the US, what is happening in Rwanda, what is happening in Germany, in France, in Norway. So we could share, and connecting there was for me important, but also connecting with a group of that I meditate with, and just having this point of rest once or twice a week. And it's strange, people would say, you meditate online? Yes, that's perfectly fine. You quiet down, you go back to your breathing. But that connection, and then connecting at home much more with my son, with my husband. And now my son has a fiancée, Thai-born American, connecting with her. That's really what brings every time new energy, and also a way to vent, to say, I don't like this, or and even be emotional or be upset, but share that with connecting. Yeah. So that connect, I would say, my word that pulls me through every time is connecting.
Yeah, wonderful. Wonderful. This connecting part I can relate to a lot, because this was actually the um, birth hour of one word stories. Because I
Okay.
connected
Yeah.
with people from different corners of the world during the pandemics online, and then I said, oh wow,
Yeah.
we have such
Yeah.
great conversations.
Yes. Yeah.
How about sharing it also with others, because
Yeah.
it's so inspirational.
Yeah.
And this is
Like
how
our conversation, I really like this. We take our time to just discuss and go in depth on a couple of things that we like to talk about, and I like that. It's
yeah, yeah.
connecting. Yeah.
Whenever I also work with people who are moving around the world, some of them, they also move with families. And just recently, one of the expats asked me, how can we actually make sure that our kids go through this transition smoothly? Before I tell you what I told him, I would like to hear from you. What would be such a, piece of golden recipe?
Well, one of the TCKs that I interviewed, I think that was really interesting, said that her parents would, before they would move, and she moved, I think, through 3 different countries as a result of the work of the parents. And her parents prepared her for her and her siblings for that new culture by cooking food that was in that new culture,
Mhm.
and also explaining things about it. But the cooking, I thought that's an interesting one, because that explains, okay, what are we going to eat there? We might and we might not, but not just taking your own stuff with you and just, as you are coming to that new culture, but already doing that process of fusion,
Mhm.
that cultural fusion in a very good, I think that would be an effective way.
Very interesting. Wow.
Yes, yeah,
Great idea, actually.
yeah,
Yeah, provided both of the parents are also open to this
of course,
transition,
yeah,
to this
yeah,
relocation.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
very interesting. Yeah. Okay, my golden piece of advice
Right, what
is
did you
not
say?
as
Yes.
creative. Talk, talk, talk.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And let them ask the questions and talk, explain, show. And
Yeah.
there's so much more, if you compare TCKs from 50 years ago to now,
Yeah.
there's so much more information, there's so much more connecting possible still with all over,
Yeah.
that the whole experience changes as well. So
Yes.
there's a lot more that you can do to land and stay connected to where you come from. So that's influenced, yeah.
Definitely, definitely. And what I really like is also how people find their way to deal with these transitions. So, also my
Yeah,
guest
yeah,
here for One Word Story is Why Wrong, who was my guest
yeah, yeah,
in the episode 33. She also said, oh, I want so much that other TCKs feel home in different places and really are
yeah,
happy
yeah,
with this, what has
yeah,
happened in their life, that I decided to found the raw culture, yeah, and
yeah.
to support them. And another one, Lisa Young, she actually did a solo show, The Earth Odyssey,
Okay.
where she shows kind of catharsis,
Oh, wow.
process,
Yeah.
how she was moving around the world,
Oh,
and
nice.
then people can relate to it, and also ask questions, and
Yeah,
also have a very, very deep emotional self-reflection.
yeah,
So right now, when you shared that you have also this golden recipe with
yeah.
relating to a poem, but also the cooking aspect
That's also
triggers
that's
my
literally a gold
curiosity a lot.
recipe.
Yes, you can
Yeah,
see that so many possibilities, so many ideas really to talk
yeah,
about this multicultural identity, as you also say,
yeah,
this fusion identity in a very, very constructive
yeah.
and beautiful way. Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. Yes, it's a joy and it's an honor to have this conversation with you. I really like it. So thank you
Thank
very,
you.
very much.
Thank you.
Yes.
And see you hopefully soon.
Yes, see you soon. Yes. And then also, face to face. Malta maybe next year, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Okay,
Crossing
good.
fingers.